Nocturnal.
Donkey Kong. Released in 1981, Donkey Kong paved the way for gaming, becoming the first arcade game to feature multiple staging and the first platform game to feature jumping. Taking the role of Mario, players must save Pauline, who is being held hostage by Donkey Kong. This created the first damsel in distress scenario in arcade games. Points are rewarded along the way by leaping over obstacles, destroying objects, collecting Pauline's items, removing rivets and completing the stage. Upon reaching the 22nd level, an error in the game's programming kills Mario, effectively ending the game. John McCurdy holds the world record with 1,259,000 points scored. The game's success has made Mario and Donkey Kong two of Nintendo's most popular and recognizable characters. Do you have what it takes to save Pauline?
In this series, we're talking arcade, and today we're talking Donkey Kong. How many of you remember the game Donkey Kong? And in case you've never seen it, I have an example of it here. But somebody's got to show me how to get to Donkey Kong, because I think when I do this, okay, there it is. All right, so it looks like a Pac-Man, but this is actually Donkey Kong. Can you guys see? Now, I haven't practiced. This is the gorilla. We're going to talk about him in a moment. And he has kidnapped Mario, or who used to be called Jumpman's girlfriend, the princess. How high can you get? This game has a long start. Now, you got to look out for the barrows, and then I forgot how you jump. How do you jump? There we go. Oh, yeah. Awesome. Oh, I forgot a lot about this game. But, look at that. I killed it without even trying. And oops, now I don't have any. And the goal is to get up and to save the princess. You realize that Mario himself is involved in over 200 video games. You know what company started Donkey Kong? Nintendo. Nintendo started Donkey Kong. They had sent a game prior to that to the United States, and it had flopped big time. And so they were about to go out of business. Now, originally, Mario was called Jumpman. But the owner of Nintendo had a landlord who was about to kick them out of their building. And guess what his name was? It was Mario. And so he named the Jumpman Mario. And then, of course, you have the gorilla and you have the princess. Now, Mario, Donkey Kong is based on Popeye. Did you realize that? Because Mario is Popeye. The gorilla is Brutus. Is that his name, Brutus? And then the princess is Olive Oil, and you have a love triangle. And that's basically the theme of Mario. The story of Donkey Kong is that Mario was mistreating his pet gorilla. And his pet, we all have pet gorillas, don't we? And his pet gorilla gets upset, escapes, steals his girlfriend, takes her to a construction site, which Mario just happens to be a plumber, and he climbs to the top. And what Mario has to do, or the Jumpman has to do, is to rescue his princess. And I got to thinking that in reality, and what I want us to talk about, is that we all have princesses in life that we're trying to rescue. We all have dreams that we're trying to accomplish. We all have a destiny that we've been created for. God has created, you've heard me say it if you've hung out at Potential, God has created you for greatness. And someone or something has stolen that, as we'll talk about in just a few moments. Now, if you want to download the outline, you can get it on our app, iOS or Android, and kind of follow along, because I put a quote in there. Heroes are often disguised as ordinary, and then they're surprised to accomplish the extraordinary. Have you ever noticed how Mario was just a plumber? All of our superheroes were just ordinary, not bad, but just ordinary professions. What was Spider-Man? You guys do go to movies, right? Was a photographer, right? Newspaper photographer, student. How about Superman? What about Wonder Woman? What was Wonder Woman? Remember what Wonder Woman's original name was? Diana Prince, I think. And she was like an assistant or secretary, something like that, during the military. They all had ordinary jobs, except for, I guess, Black Panther. He was a king. That's a pretty good job, I think. But they were all ordinary. And then they were surprised when they did something extraordinary. Why? Because something in their past happened that at the time didn't seem that big of a deal. But in reality, it changed everything. Superman's planet blew up. That's a difficult thing, a bad thing, and yet that's what made him Superman. Spider-Man got bitten by a spider. But had he not gotten bitten by the spider, he would have never been able to take out all the bad dudes. And Blade, that's my favorite, the vampire hunter. Blade was what? Well, his mother was eaten by a vampire. Batman, his parents were killed by a burglar. Right? All of these things that happened in the past led to, surprisingly, their success as heroes. And the same thing happens in us. In the Mario game, it's the fact that he's a plumber and the pipes and the ladders and the wrenches that lead to his success. Now, Donkey Kong, you know what his original name was? Stubborn Gorilla. That's not near as exciting, is it? Let's go play Stubborn Gorilla. And so what the creator of Donkey Kong did is went to the thesaurus. And under stubborn, guess what he read? Donkey. And under gorilla, guess what he saw? King Kong. And so he came up with the name Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong, the stubborn gorilla, steals the princess. And you know what the Bible teaches? Is that we all have a Donkey Kong in our lives. We all have an adversary. We all have an enemy who has tried to take something from us that is not his to take. In John 10:10, it says this. It says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. Is to take that which isn't his. Is to take our relationships, to take our dreams, to take our destiny, to destroy it. He says, watch out, Peter does. Peter says, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. Today we might say your great enemy, Donkey Kong. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Therefore, Peter says, stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. And remember that your family of believers all over the world are going through the same kind of suffering. Because when the enemy attacks your dream, you know what the tendency is? It's to think you're the only one. You're the only one going through what you're going through. The adversary loves to isolate us, to steal from us any hope that we one day might actually accomplish that for which God created us. So to know how to deal with the Donkey Kong in our lives, I thought, well, is there a Mario in the text, in the scripture? How about an Old Testament Mario? And I found one. His name starts with an M as well. Moses. And so Moses is kind of an Old Testament Mario in the sense that Donkey Kong steals something that's not his, and Moses has to rescue it. And along the way, we learn some things about how to rescue our dreams or our destiny or our relationship. I gotta tell you, I love the narrative of the people of God's journey to the promise that God's made them. And the reason I love that narrative is because God's given all of us a promise. And there's so much to learn. I mean, you can look at Joshua, the one that he mentored. Like, you can look at Moses. You can look at the Egyptians. You can look at the journey. You can look at their lack of faith. You can look at the giant. There's so much to look at that relates to what you and I are dealing with, running after the promise that God's given us. See, there's a tendency in our minds to think that once we have the promise, it's all downhill. In other words, if I know I'm going to succeed, then I'm just going to keep taking one step after another after another. But along the way, there are so many challenges. It's kind of like the King of Kong. There's a documentary about the guy, well, they say he cheated, but who used to have the high score in Donkey Kong. They would play for hours, one screen after another after another. So what do we learn from Mario Moses? Here's the first thing, is that he was created for greatness. God is going to come to Moses, and Moses is in the middle of nowhere. He's on the backside of the desert taking care of sheep. And look at what God says in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. Then the Lord told Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries of distress. They have been enslaved for 400 years. He says, because of their harsh slave drivers, yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I, God, have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile, spacious land. What do you think Moses did when he heard that? When God said, hey, Moses, on the backside of the desert, I just wanted to let you know I've heard the cries of my people. And I've never forgotten the promise that I made to them, that they would be a great nation. And so I have decided that I am going to come in at this time and I'm going to rescue them. And I think Moses said, amen, glory, hallelujah. Right? Just as if God were to come to you and say, I'm going to do something about poverty. I'm going to do something about the suicide rate. I'm going to come down and rescue broken homes. I'm going to come down and do something about all the hurt and the pain and the war. Yeah, awesome, God. He says, I'm going to do what I said I would do. I'm going to keep my promise. I'm going to lead them into a land flowing with milk and honey. Right now, and he lists all the Ite families who were there. And then in verse 9, he says, look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abused them. And I think Moses is like, yeah, baby, yeah, baby. And then comes verse 10. Remember, God said, I'm going to come down, and I'm going to rescue them. And then in verse 10, what does he say? There's just two words. Read it with me, would you? Now, go. What? God, I thought you were going to do something about poverty. I thought, God, you were going to do something about brokenness. I thought, God, you were going to do something about crime. I thought, God, you were going to do something about war. Now go, for I am sending who? You, Moses, to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Now what's interesting is Moses was created for greatness, but he didn't pursue this opportunity. I put it like this. Moses didn't decide to be a hero. He was created and called to greatness. And you know what? So are you. You are called and created for greatness. There is opportunity all around you. In the place in which you work, in the neighborhood in which you live, in the church in which you attend, and the world in which you were born, the time in which you live, there is opportunity for greatness all around. And God has, just like he did in the life of Moses, called you to greatness. You were created for this moment. The question really isn't whether it can be accomplished. The question is whether or not you're going to go. The question is whether or not I'm going to go. The question is whether or not we're going to step up. In the book of Isaiah, it says, then I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to the people? Who will go for us? And what did Isaiah say? Here I am, send me. And God's response is, well, I don't know about you, Isaiah. I was looking for somebody a little bit better. No. He says, yeah, you go. You have the courage to raise your hand and say, Lord, here I am. There's a lot of challenge that comes with being a hero. There's a lot of misunderstanding that comes with being a hero. You can just sit in the crowd and nobody will ever say anything. But the moment you raise your hand and say, I'm going to run after my destiny, there's a lot of folks that will have a lot of opinions about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And the greater the impact that you have, the bigger the dream that you run after, the more arrows that will be shot. And so the easiest thing to do is just not do it. You know, I read an article by F.W. Borum, and I really thought it was interesting because he talked about how in 1809, Napoleon had all these battles going on, and people were waiting with bated breath for the outcome of the battles. But he also said that in 1809, there were a bunch of babies that were born. I made a list of just some of the ones he mentioned. He mentioned a bunch. But there was Gladstone in Liverpool. There was Tennyson, Alfred Tennyson in Somersby. There was Oliver Wendell Holmes in Massachusetts. There was Abraham Lincoln in Kentucky. There was Frederick Chopin in Warsaw. And the question is which of the battles of 1809 were actually more important than the babies that were born in 1809? In other words, what he writes is that when God needs to do something, when there's a challenge that needs to be taken on, when there's a right that needs to be made, or a wrong that needs to be made right, you know what God does? A baby is born. A baby is born. Because God is intentional. That's what Christ is all about. He was born intentionally to do what? Good news, great joy for all people that today in the city of David, a rescuer or a savior is born. But the same thing is true for you. You weren't born accidentally on a certain year, on a certain day. No. There was a wrong that needed to be made right. There was an impact that needed to be made. There was a challenge that needed to be taken on. And so what did God do? He knit you together in your mother's womb. You are the solution and you are the answer when God said, I'm going to come down and I'm going to do something about this situation. So he said to Moses, when a wrong wants righting, a work wants doing, a truth wants preaching, a continent wants opening, God sends a baby into the world to do it. That's what F.W. Borum said. So you and I are created for greatness. Secondly, you'd think if you were created for greatness, you would be born into ease, right? To make it easy for you to accomplish your destiny. But no, Moses was born into difficulty. You don't have to be born into this perfect situation in order to accomplish your dream or to reach your destiny. Let's just read about when Moses was born. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and to do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. This is what was going on in the life of Moses' mom and dad. This is what Moses was born into. And then Pharaoh gave this order to all the people. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the river. The girls can live, but the boys, they got to die. Because see, God was blessing his people, and as a result, Pharaoh was getting a little freaked out that if they became too powerful, they'd overthrow the Egyptians. And so he said, we got to do something about this. And so he made their work more challenging, punished them more harshly, and killed their baby boys. Moses was born into that. I mean, that's not the ideal situation in which to be a hero. Unwanted pregnancies aren't a new thing. Moses was unwanted by his whole society. In Romans chapter 5, it says this. It says, not only this, but we also rejoice in sufferings. Now, that doesn't mean that when things get difficult, you go like, woo, it's awesome, I got a flat tire, awesome, I'm sick. No. We rejoice in sufferings. What's the next word? It's the most important word in the text, knowing. We suffer knowing that suffering produces something. We suffer knowing that suffering in and of itself is not the end if we're willing to embrace it. We rejoice because suffering is the precursor to something. It is what comes before something. All throughout Scripture you see that. And so Paul writes, but we also rejoice in sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance, character, and character, what? Hope. Therefore, when you struggle, therefore, when challenge comes, you can rejoice. Why? Because you know that is actual preparation that's going to propel you into your destiny. It's not an obstacle to keep you from where God created you to go. It's actually a step in that direction. It's to propel you in that direction. Now, when I was in college, I played basketball, and I hated practice. For those of you who are children of the 80s, it's kind of like Alvin Iverson. It's just practice. And the reason I hated practice is because we had to run. I know some of you like running. You're the weird ones. Right? But most of us don't. We don't like running. It's just running. You breathe hard, your heart beats. But we would run and we would run and we would run and we would run. But in reality, the great thing about running in preseason meant that I was on the team. See, I wouldn't have had to run. All I would have had to do is quit the team. Those who weren't on the team didn't have to run. It meant I had a scholarship. It meant I didn't have to pay for college. And so the running was a knowing that college was free. It was a knowing that I was on the team. And I just want to encourage you, because if you're going to be a hero, if you're going to be a Mario, if you're going to take on Donkey Kong, then you got to know that even though maybe you were born on the wrong side of the tracks, maybe you were born without all the resources, maybe you were born into a difficult situation, but it is that very challenge that God's going to use to make you what He created you to be, if you will embrace it. Embrace it. So, he was created for greatness. He was born into difficulty. And then third, he failed publicly. I mean, failure is never fun, is it? I've been in ministry a long time, and I got to tell you, you're up here. And you know the only thing about being up here is you're up here. I've tripped up here. I fell up here. I've said stupid things up here. You probably find this hard to believe. I've mispronounced words up here. And those things are just embarrassing. But Moses really screws up. See, I didn't finish the story. Moses was born into this difficult situation. But his mom and dad, the book of Hebrews says, they knew. Just like you, he had a dream, a destiny, a purpose. And so they hid him until he got too old to hide. And so his mom made what you might call an ark, put Moses in the ark, and set him afloat on the Nile River. She didn't know what was going to happen to him. She was just trusting that God would take care of him, that he was created to do something of significance. So she puts him in the ark, puts him on the Nile River, and just kind of pushes him off, hoping no alligators will get him, hoping he won't fall into the water, hoping that God will do something. And sure enough, Moses' little ark comes up against the shore, and he starts crying. And guess who's in the Nile River taking a bath? You'll never guess who happens to be in the very spot where Moses comes up against the shore. Pharaoh's daughter. And she's like, what's that? Of course, she doesn't go over there. She sends one of her helpers over there to get the little baby. And then she look. And I mean, every baby is cute, right? I mean, not as cute as my grandson, but you know, I don't know about that. Stephanie and I have been watching Lion for the last week because Tyler and Amber are celebrating their anniversary. And I have come to a conclusion. Lion is awesome for a day. So she goes over and she gets little baby Mario Moses, and she's like, oh, he's so cute. And so she goes into her dad, Pharaoh dad, and she's like, Pharaoh dad, can we keep him? Can we keep him? He can't turn down his daughter. He says, sure thing. Well, guess who's been walking along the shore watching all this? Moses' sister. And when she sees that Pharaoh's daughter has fallen in love with her little brother, she runs up to her and says, hey, would you like me to get a Hebrew woman to wean him? And she's like, yeah, we need somebody. So Moses' mother actually is the one who weans her only son. God is so cool. God is always working behind the scenes if we'll trust him. And so Moses grows up in Pharaoh's palace. He goes to the best schools. He knows all the right people. But he's still a Hebrew. And I think deep inside, he knew that he was created to do something. And his first attempt, he fails big time. In Exodus chapter 2, it says this: many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. And during the visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews after looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching. That's always a bad sign, isn't it? The moment you and I start looking in every direction to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. Yeah, man, aren't we always tempted to do that? To hide our failures? Not the body in the sand. I hope we're not. Please don't. But aren't we tempted to hide our failures? Not just the ones that are embarrassing, but the ones that make it look as if we'll never succeed. Years ago, we had a executive pastor here who thought that I ought to run for the president or the leadership of our denomination. Their annual meeting was going to be in Orlando, and he thought that would be a really good deal, an opportunity for the church to have impact, blah, blah, blah. My wife thought it was a bad idea. And so I didn't listen to her. And I eventually was talked into it, and so we're in Orlando, and the time has come, and they're announcing who's running, and what Steph and I were unaware of is that our executive pastor at the time had brought 3 of these big buses of people up to Orlando to vote and celebrate my victory. And then it came time for the vote. I lost. Not only did I lose, the only votes I got are the ones I paid for to be there. The people who came up in the buses. It wasn't a pleasant experience. And there is a tendency when we fail, when we screw up, to give up. Because see, along the journey towards your destiny, there are going to be missteps. There may even be times when you and I are in open rebellion. But Winston Churchill said this: success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts. Hey, how many of us have given up on our dream? You've lost that courage. You've decided to be okay with where you're at. Look what it says. Here's I love what I get to do. 1 John chapter 1 says, if we go around bragging we have no sin, then we're fooling ourselves and are strangers to the truth. What, me? But you're tempted, right? Aren't you tempted to dismiss your failure? Everybody fails. Everybody screws up. Right? Bury it in the sand. You know how you know if you struggle with this? Is that if you rarely apologize to anybody. If you can't apologize, then the reality is we're probably who John's talking about. We're probably the people walking around. I'm sad that you failed, but I haven't. God just doesn't like me. That's why I haven't succeeded. It's not that I have failed. It's not that I've made a bad decision. It's not that I've missed the mark. Because remember, what does the word sin mean? It means to miss the mark, miss the bullseye of perfection. But, it's a big Kim Kardashian size, if we own up to our sins, God shows that he is faithful. How? By forgiving us of our what? Screw up. Isn't that awesome? God forgives us if we'll own up to it, if we'll confess it, if we'll agree with him about the fact that we miss the mark and quit trying to bury it and quit trying to hide it and quit trying to pretend. It says that he will forgive us, purifying us from all the pollution and all the bad things we have done. Because see, with failure, there's a pollution around failure. Failure will discourage you. It will depress you. And if you bury it, it will haunt you, as we talked last week. And so God not only forgives me of my failure, he blows the pollution out of the air. So Moses was created for greatness. He was birthed into difficulty. He failed publicly. Just a couple more real quick. He experienced fear. He experienced fear. And I'm going to tell you, if you're going to run after your dream, there are going to be times when you're afraid. And you know what a lot of us are most afraid of? Failing. You know, for a while, I've been working on a book. But it's one of those things that I struggle with. And I've told you before the story of how I was in 4th grade and Mrs. Johnson, she was our teacher. And I told you, one day she was gone, we had a substitute. And you know how 4th graders treat substitutes. Anybody here ever been a substitute teacher? Not a pleasant experience, is it? And so we had a writing assignment. We were doing cursive writing, and we all decided since she was a substitute, we didn't have to do cursive, so we printed. And when Miss Johnson got back, she was mad. She said, blah, 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 blah. Kind of like that Charlie Brown teacher. So because you guys did not listen, I just gave everybody a C. I didn't even look at it. I just gave everybody a C. And I looked down at my paper. I didn't have a C. I had a D. And so I went up, Miss Johnson, you didn't give me a C. And she said, well, you can't even print nice. That was in 4th grade. I don't know how old you are in 4th grade, but it's a long time ago. I still remember that, and I think it is the fear of not being able to do it that makes it incredibly challenging for me to sit down and to write something. Moses experienced that same kind of fear. What if this doesn't go well? What if people don't respond? Watch, let me go through these real quickly. Moses, the first thing Moses said is, who am I? Look, Exodus 3. When God says, I'm going to do this, and guess what, Moses? You're going to go. But Moses protested, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? You ever felt like that? Well, I can tell you I have. I remember years ago, about 30 years ago, when I walked down an aisle, looked Stephanie in the face and said, I do. And then I walked out of that church, Finch Baptist Church, and realized something. I'm a husband. Like, who am I to be a husband? Never been a husband before. I don't know what a husband's supposed to do or how a husband's supposed to act. And then 3 years later, I was 25 years old. Steph was 23 years old. And Tyler was conceived. And then he was born, and he was born like 6 weeks early, and there were all kinds of issues. But eventually, the nurse took him out, and she put him in my arms. I was like, who am I to be a dad? I don't know how to be a dad. What's a dad supposed to do? What's a dad supposed to act like? What's a dad supposed to say? And then I remember when God nudged my heart. I didn't go to school to be a pastor, but he nudged my heart. He opened up a door and kind of walked me in to being the lead pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church. And I'm like, who am I to be a pastor? I'm sure you felt that way. Who am I to start a business? Who am I to be in a relationship like this? Who am I to be the first one in my family to go off to college? But what does God say? He says, you know what, Moses? It's the wrong question. It doesn't matter who you are. It's all about who I am. He says, God answered, I will be with you. You know, if you've never felt that fear, it's probably because you've never pursued anything that's of any size. So you can pursue small things. But when you pursue big things, you realize you can't do it. And when you realize you can't do it, it's like, God, who am I? And God says, don't worry, Moses, I'm going with you. And you'd think that'd be enough for Moses, but it wasn't for him, and it probably isn't for you and I. Then Moses says, well, I'm glad you're going to be there, but who are you? Look, that's what he asked. But Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and I tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they're going to ask me, what's his name? Well, what do I tell them? And God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. You know what I wrote down? You know what God told Moses? He said, you tell them I am everything you need. You want to know who I am? I'm all that you need to succeed. I'm all that you need to be a parent, to be a boyfriend, to be a father, to be a worker, to be a Christ follower. I am everything you will ever need to accomplish what I created you to be. I am. And that's enough, God says. But Moses is like you and I. He's, okay, but what about them? In the end, I've got to influence them. He says in chapter 4, Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me? What if they won't listen to me? What if they say, the Lord, Moses, he never appeared to you. And what does God say? The Lord said to him, hey, Mo, what's in your hand? What's in your hand? And of course, we know that if you read the narrative, Moses had that shepherd thing in his hand, and God used what was in his hand to influence or reveal to everyone who God was and how he was using Moses. And I think God says the same thing to you and I today. When you and I say, God, how am I going to influence the people I need to lead in order to accomplish my destiny? I think God looks at you and he says, what's in your hand? In other words, God has already given you and I what we need to influence whoever we need to influence to accomplish what he created us to do. It's in your hand. It's in who you are. It's in the experiences you've had. What's in your hand? See, we're always looking for something out there that we need to bring in order to, and God's like, no, what's in you? What's in your hand? Leverage what's in your hand. It's enough, Moses. Don't worry about it. Because what's in your hand, I gave you. But that's not enough. Not enough for Moses. Often not enough for us. He says, I can't. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, oh, Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been. And even now, even as you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled. And then, don't you love this? God, I can't do this. My tongue, I would do it. My tongue. I can't do it, God. I don't. And God says, hey, Mo, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. And I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. God restates, Moses, have you forgotten who you're talking to? I'm the one that made your mouth, and I will give you the words to say. You just got to go. You just got to pursue. You just have to start. And eventually, fear, if not surrendered to God, will become rebellion. It does in the life of Moses. You would think that Moses would say, okay, the all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere at one time God is going to go with me. That has to be enough. But then Moses is basically, I'm not going to do this. It says, but Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send anyone else. And how does God respond? What's it say in verse 14? The Lord became what? Angry. Why did God get angry? He got angry because this was no longer about Moses' insecurities. This was about Moses' heart. This was about open rebellion. And I just want to challenge some of us. Some of us have said no to God for so long, and we've said, well, it's because I'm shy, or it's because I'm an extrovert, or it's because I've screwed up in the past, or it's because I don't have enough money, or it's because I can't do it. And we've got a million different excuses that every time God nudges our heart, we have a reason why we can't serve Him, why we can't give to Him, why we can't consistently follow Him. And we need to realize that is just rebellion. Cosmic treason. It's looking the all-powerful God in, and He's not fooled by it. So Moses was created for greatness, to be a hero, a Mario, to save the princess. But he was born into difficulty. He failed publicly. He experienced fear, as all heroes do. And the good part is he persevered through challenge. He persevered through challenge. Later in the journey, you can read about how all this happens, and Moses leads them out. And then there is a battle, right? There's a battle. It's like the big gorilla, Donkey Kong, is continually dropping barrels. He's never going to stop dropping barrels. The moment you decide you're going to run for your destiny, he's just always going to be dropping barrels. Why? Not because he cares about you, but because the greatest way in which for us to glorify God is to do what? Is to become what he created us to be. Is to honor him with our life. Romans 12 says it is our reasonable act of worship. It's not the song that we sing or where our hands are when we sing the song. It's the way in which we surrender our lives and pursue our destiny. And so what would the enemy like to do? What would Donkey Kong like to do more than anything else? Is to keep you at the bottom of the ladder. To keep you and I from accomplishing what God created. So he's just dropping barrel after barrel. They're in a battle. And look at what happens. It says, as long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. So he's got this. As long as he could hold it up, they would win. But whenever his hands began to drop, the other team, all right, gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. And then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands. So his hands held steady until sunset. And as a result, Joshua overwhelmed the enemy. Here's what I put in my notes. Perseverance is empowered by Christ, supported by others, and will always result in success. Why don't you say that with me? You ready? Here we go. Perseverance is empowered, it is, and results in. Isn't that awesome? If you and I will persevere, the results will be what we were created to accomplish. I mean, that's what happened to Moses, right? Moses led the people out of bondage. And not only did these slaves overthrow the most powerful nation in the world, they never raised a weapon in which to do it. The Egyptians said, hey guys, why don't you go ahead and get out of here? And we want you to leave so badly that on your way out, we're going to give you all of our wealth. Because God will always accomplish what he sets out to do. But in order for you and I to persevere, we need to remind ourselves that we are empowered by Christ. Isn't that what Paul said in Philippians? He says, for I can do everything through Christ who, what? Gives me the strength. So we are empowered by Christ, but then we need the encouragement or the support of others. We need the right people in our lives. People who will encourage us. That's why you heard earlier, get involved in a connect group. Why? Because one's too small a number for greatness. You can come and you can sit in that chair, and we are so glad that you're here, but you need people in your life. And to invite people into your life is a journey. It's not easy. That's why we don't do it. It takes time. Some of them are going to hurt you. Some of them are crazy. But there are others that are going to encourage you and support you and challenge you. And they're going to be there when you need them. And they're going to remind you of your calling. You and I need people in our lives if we want to persevere. Because listen to me, if you don't have people in your life, one day you will give up. You'll give up. You'll settle. Now, you won't call it giving up. You'll have some reason or excuse, or, you'll have all this kind, and we can spiritualize, why we've surrendered, why we gave up on the dream. But you will give up. And that means that one day I have to stand before God, and I have to say, God, I gave up on what you created me to be. Why, Troy? Well, it was hard. Donkey Kong kept dropping barrels. Why didn't you invite people into your life? Well, I was busy, God, and I planned on it, but, I had kids to do this, and I had that to do that, and I went when I could. God, you saw me there. I want to stand before God, and I know when I stand before Him, I'm going to be like Moses. There are going to be times when I have failed. But can you imagine when the one with nail-scarred hands looks at you and says, well done, my good and faithful servant? Think of a better way to glorify Him than to live the life you were created to live. So, I put the last thing there in your notes. So if you're going to rescue the princess, what do you have to do? You have to put a quarter in the machine. You can't ever play Donkey Kong from the side. You got to commit to it. Got to put the quarter in. And I love the story when the people of God leave Egypt, and then Pharaoh's like, oh, bad decision, and he chases after them, and they go to God, and Moses is like, oh, God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And look at what God says in Exodus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Why are you complaining? Moses, you have been given a promise. You have been given everything you need. What does he say? He says, tell the people to get it in gear. Tell the people to put a quarter in the machine and start running after the promise that I have given them. And I think God says the same thing to you and I in 20 and 20. So here's the thing. You're going to put a quarter in the machine? And I thought a cool way for us to commit to do this is to do that, is to put a quarter in the machine. Now, we don't have hundreds of Donkey Kong machines. And so what I want to challenge us to do in the next few moments is to take out a quarter and to place it in this basket or that basket or the basket up there or over there. And then we're going to do something really cool artistically with those quarters. And we're going to put it, I don't know, in the lot. We're going to put it somewhere so that all year long when you come and you see all those quarters, you are reminded that you put a quarter in the machine and that you have committed to your destiny. You have committed to greatness. Now you're like, Troy, oh my gosh, I know nobody carries quarters nowadays. So we have change. Just like in the old arcade days, we have people who are going to provide change. Whatever kind of change you need. Now, if you don't have any cash at all, then borrow some from a friend, all right? Borrow some from a friend. This is a symbol of our commitment to save the princess, to really go after it in 2020. So if you would, bow your head, grab your quarter. And like I said, if you need change, just get in line and somebody's going to be walking around saying, hey, you need change, you need change. We're not looking for nickels. We're not looking for dimes. The machine doesn't take those. I remember it was frustrating as a kid. You had to have a quarter. You had to make a commitment. That's what this is about. It's about the commitment. We're not looking for dollars. Don't put $1 in there. Don't put a $5 bill in there. just a quarter. Father, I thank you for the calling on every single one of our lives. I pray if there's anyone here who's never trusted you as their Savior, the Master, the CEO, the Lord of their life, that you can do it right there where you're sitting. Just surrender to Him. God, I ask you to do for me what I can't do for myself. I am committing to do life your way. And then, God, as a group of people, 2020 is going to be different. 2020 is going to be the year that we run passionately after the destiny for which you have created us. And so we're going to sing this last song. And as we do, I just encourage you, find a spot. And as you drop that quarter in there, remind yourself of actually what you're committing to. God, I'm committing to run after my dream. Doesn't matter what difficulty I've been born into. It doesn't matter what kind of barrel gets dropped on my head. I am believing in the calling that you have put on my life, and I will not surrender. I am going to persevere. In Jesus' name, for your glory. Let's stand and sing as we respond together.